Why regret feels heavy and how to stop it before it starts. When you think about the word regret, your mind probably jumps immediately to the cinematic version. You think of the huge movie-worthy mistake, the single dramatic fork in the road moment where everything went wrong. Maybe it's the dramatic breakup in the rain, the massive public failure, or the one business deal that bankrupted the family. It's the kind of epic blunder that makes for a great story at a dinner party once the initial sting has faded and you've had a few years to polish the lesson learned. We've been conditioned by Hollywood to believe that this crushing, heavy feeling that eventually weighs us down must be the result of one catastrophic, undeniable event. We wait for the big boom to happen before we think we're allowed to change. But what if that entire premise is completely, fundamentally wrong? What if the real culprit behind that lingering mental weight, the reason you feel tired as a person, is not a single dramatic error, but rather the quiet, almost invisible accumulation of 1,000 tiny choices you simply never paused long enough to think through? Regret doesn't announce itself with a loud, attention-grabbing slap. Instead, it acts like a slow, insidious leak, a constant drip, drip of small missteps that only becomes noticeable when it's too late and the entire kitchen of your life is flooded. You don't wake up one day to find your house underwater. You wake up and realize you've been ignoring a puddle in the basement for 3 years. Regret doesn't come from one dramatic mistake. It comes from what you didn't pause long enough to think through. And when you zoom out, regret stops looking random. The same situations show up again and again, just wearing different clothes. And once you see that repetition, the weight starts to make sense because it isn't chaos, it's a pattern. Pattern number 1, the slow creep of I knew better. This is how the mental weight of regret actually begins to build. A little loss of confidence here, a dash of self-disappointment there, and the constant quiet hum of I knew better running in the background of your mind. It builds silently until one day the pressure is so heavy that you can't ignore it anymore. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. It is the mental discomfort that happens when your actions don't align with what you know to be true. Every time you ignore that little ping in your gut, you are creating a tiny crack in your foundation. Think about the moments you've brushed off because they were convenient at the time. Maybe you ignored a massive red flag in a new relationship because you were lonely, and now you're emotionally tangled in a mess you saw coming 6 months ago. Or you followed the crowd for an easy win, and now you're holding all the consequences alone. Or maybe you took the temptation because it looked fun, and now you're stuck cleaning up the fallout. Regret is not one moment. It's a collection of missed opportunities to redirect and small missteps woven together over time. I call this the dust bunny effect. You didn't mean to let it get that bad, but because you didn't pause to sweep the floor as you went, you're now dealing with mental dust bunnies the size of zebras in the corners of your life. You aren't being punished. You are just living in a house you haven't cleaned in a decade. Pattern number 2, regret doesn't negotiate. You can argue with guilt. You can find a way to justify a bad choice by blaming your upbringing, your boss, or your stress levels. You can absolutely distract yourself from general discomfort. We've all mastered the art of scrolling right through a rough day to avoid thinking about our problems. But regret? Regret doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your excuses. When it finally shows up, it brings a level of blinding clarity that most of us have spent years trying to avoid. Regret is the moment of brutal honesty where there are 0 excuses and 0 sugarcoating left. It is the moment you recognize your own active role in your pain. This is known as the self-discrepancy theory. It is the gap between who you are and who you know you should be. Regret is the bill collector for that gap. That sounds incredibly heavy, doesn't it? But here is the better by intent twist. It's actually the most empowering truth about the whole messy business. Why? Because if you are the one who caused it, you are the only one who can prevent it. Regret is non-negotiable because it is a direct confrontation with your own intent. It's the moment the physics of life hands you the receipt and says, "No more excuses. This is exactly what you chose." Pattern number 3, the erosion of self-trust. The real lasting damage of regret isn't even the situation itself. It's what it does to how you see yourself. This is the part people never talk about because it's not aesthetic. This slow mental erosion creates self-doubt, hesitation, and massive overthinking. Eventually, if you let this continue, you stop trusting your own judgment. Think about the biological reality of trust. We think of trust as something we give to others, but the most important trust you have is the trust you have with yourself. Every time you make a choice you regret, you are telling your brain, "I am not a reliable leader. I make bad choices." And when you stop trusting yourself, you start to live a smaller life. It's not because the world is inherently dangerous or scary, but because you become afraid of your own decisions. You become more cautious, more anxious, not because you fear external events, but because you fear your own next move. You start living like you're walking on eggshells inside your own head. You stop taking risks, not because the risk is too high, but because you no longer believe you have the math to handle the outcome. You start settling for less, because less feels safer than your own decision-making process. You've turned yourself into a prisoner of your own history. Pattern number 4, the regret spiral. This fear of yourself feeds a powerful, miserable feedback loop. It's called the regret spiral. It's a very simple, very destructive equation. You feel regret, which creates discomfort. You look for escape, so you do something impulsive, which creates a new regret. When you feel the weight of a bad choice, it creates an immediate sense of discomfort. Because we haven't been taught how to sit with that pain, we desperately look for an escape. Usually, that escape is another quick, bad choice, a drink, a distraction, a shiny object, or another impulsive reaction. Before you know it, you're in a loop. You're not broken, and you're certainly not doomed. You're simply in a pattern that no one ever taught you how to interrupt. This is why people often say they feel tired as a person. It's not lack of sleep. It's the Zeigarnik effect, the psychological phenomenon where our brains get stuck on incomplete loops. Every choice you regret is an open loop in your brain, constantly draining your focus, your motivation, and your ability to even look forward to the future. It's hard to be excited about next year when you're still carrying the weight of last year's unexamined receipts. Pattern number 5, the hot stove lesson. Here is the good news. Regret is not a punishment handed down by the universe. It is simply the unavoidable lesson you were supposed to learn from a choice you didn't think through properly. It doesn't mean you are a bad person. It just means you were unprepared. Think of regret like touching a hot stove. It hurts, but it's a remarkably effective teacher. And now you know exactly what not to touch again. But here's the obvious reality. You don't need to touch the stove to learn the lesson. The world loves selling a phoenix rising from the ashes story, the idea that you have to crash your life into a wall before you can grow. But you don't. You don't need a dramatic collapse to understand cause and effect. You have the ability to learn in advance. You can think ahead. You can pause. Because when you pause, you can see the likely return before the action is ever taken. Regret is optional, not because you're going to achieve perfection, but because you are choosing to be fully aware. Pain isn't punishment. It's a lesson. Pattern number 6, the opposite of regret. Regret is just a signal. It's a simple sign flashing, this wasn't worth the cost. Once you understand the cost in advance, before you ever make the choice, the cycle of regret simply stops forming. And when you do better next time, when you pause, do the math, and walk away from a shiny trap, something incredible happens. You get a clean, proud, private feeling. It's that warmth in your chest that says, good job, another one in the win column. That feeling is the exact opposite of regret. It is self-respect. And once you feel that self-respect just a few times, once you realize you can trust yourself to protect your own future, you'll do anything to feel it again. You stop chasing the shiny objects because they can't compete with the feeling of a clean conscience and a steady life. You realize you aren't missing out anymore. You are moving forward. Learning the cost in advance. Regret is not a life sentence. It's just information. You control regret by controlling the cause, not by beating yourself up after the damage is done. This isn't about some abstract mind shift or an aesthetic blow up. It's just pure, practical cause and effect. And the goal is simple. Learn the cost in advance. Learn the consequences in advance. Learn the return in advance. The moment you look at the price tag of an impulse and decide the price is too high, you have already won. You've closed the loop before it even started. And because breaking these patterns is the hardest part of this work, I've linked a companion PDF below. It's designed to help you immediately begin identifying and interpreting your own regret patterns before they repeat. No candles, no sage, just the practical steps you need to get your life back. We are moving forward by intent, and I hope you'll join us. I will see you in the next one.